Hello and welcome to Late Night Stories. In the quiet rhythm of life, where each sunrise gently unfolds another chapter, there exists a law as old as time itself. Karma. It is not bound by age, nor does it hurry or hesitate. Rather, it moves with the steady grace of a well-worn path, reflecting back to us the steps we have taken. Perhaps you have felt its presence in the simplest moments. A kind word returned unexpectedly, a long-forgotten kindness resurfacing like a familiar melody, or even a hard lesson reappearing until its wisdom is finally understood. Karma is not about punishment or reward, but balance, a gentle reminder that every action, thought, and intention we set forth in the world carries an echo. Like ripples on a still pond, what we send out inevitably finds its way back. Some call it the golden rule, others see it as a cosmic ledger, but at its heart, karma is the story of cause and effect, weaving through our lives in ways both seen and unseen. It teaches us that even the smallest gestures, a warm smile, a patient heart, a listening ear, hold power far beyond the moment. As we walk together into this story, let us pause for a moment of reflection. Think back on the paths you have traveled, the kindnesses you have given and received, and the lessons life has gently or perhaps firmly placed before you. For within each of our lives, karma has already written its tale. Now, let us step into a story where its presence is unmistakable, a reminder that life is always listening, always watching, and always ready to return to us the energy we so freely give. James Carter had spent most of his life believing in hard work. A retired farmer in his late 70s, he had seen countless seasons pass, each one teaching him that what you plant is what you harvest. The golden fields of wheat, the ripening orchards, the gentle sway of cornfields. Each crop was the result of patience, care, and dedication. But what James had never quite realized was that this simple truth applied to more than just farming, and applied to life itself. After his wife Margaret passed away, James became a solitary man. His once warm and welcoming home turned cold, his porch empty, and his fields less cared for. He had 2 children, Paul and Susan, but over the years his pride and stubbornness had built walls between them. Paul had moved to the city, frustrated with his father's resistance to change, while Susan, though living nearby, often felt unwelcome due to James's sharp tongue and constant complaints about life. Instead of planting love and kindness in his relationships, James had unknowingly sown seeds of resentment and isolation. The bitterness he carried in his heart toward his children, toward life's unfairness, and even toward himself, had grown into a heavy harvest of loneliness. One crisp autumn afternoon, while tending to his small garden, James met an old friend, Henry, a fellow farmer who, despite his age, carried an air of peace and contentment. They sat on the porch, watching the golden sun set over the hills, and Henry spoke softly. "James, do you remember the old proverb, 'What you sow, you shall reap'?" James gave a dry chuckle. "I've spent my whole life farming, Henry. I know that better than anyone." Henry smiled knowingly. "Not just in the fields, my friend. In life. In the people we love. In the thoughts we nurture. Have you been sowing peace, kindness, and understanding? Or have you been planting anger, regret, and sorrow?" James stiffened but said nothing. Henry continued. "I once struggled like you, James. My son left home, my daughter barely spoke to me. But then I realized something. It wasn't the world that had abandoned me. It was me who had shut it out. When I stopped blaming and started giving love, I got love in return." That night, James lay awake, Henry's words echoing in his mind. Had he been the one pushing his children away? Was it too late to change? Determined to make a change, James decided to start small. The next morning, instead of calling Susan to complain about his aching back or broken fence, he called to ask how she was doing. Surprised but pleased, Susan spoke with warmth James hadn't heard in years. Days later, James found himself visiting his old church, where he heard a sermon about forgiveness. Not just forgiving others, but forgiving oneself. It struck him deeply. That afternoon, he sat on his porch and whispered into the wind, "Margaret, I'm sorry. I've been so lost since you left. I don't know how to fix everything, but I want to try." As the wind rustled through the trees, it felt as though the universe had heard him. James decided to write to Paul, something he hadn't done in years. Instead of scolding him for never visiting, he wrote, "I miss you, son. I hope you are doing well. If you ever have time, I'd love to see you." To his surprise, Paul responded, "Dad, I've missed you too. I'd love to visit soon." And so, weeks later, Paul arrived at the farm, his young daughter in tow. Watching his granddaughter run across the fields brought tears to James's eyes. "She's beautiful," he said, voice thick with emotion. Paul smiled. "She's been wanting to meet her grandpa." In that moment, James realized that the walls he had built were not indestructible. They could be torn down, brick by brick, with small acts of love and openness. As the seasons changed, so did James. He began practicing gratitude, writing in an old notebook each morning about what he was thankful for. Instead of focusing on pain, he focused on the beauty around him. The golden wheat swaying in the fields, the laughter of his granddaughter, the warmth of his daughter's embrace. One day, while visiting the town's general store, he overheard a young woman saying she had lost her job and was struggling. Remembering Henry's words about planting kindness, he quietly left an envelope with some money for her. When she found it, tears filled her eyes and she whispered, "Whoever did this, thank you." James felt a warmth in his chest. He had given kindness, and in return he felt something he hadn't in years: purpose. Years passed, and James continued his journey of love and acceptance. On one peaceful evening, sitting on his porch, he reflected on his life. He had spent too many years sowing bitterness, but in the end, he had chosen to plant love, and the harvest had been abundant. As he closed his eyes, a soft breeze carried the scent of wheat and the echoes of laughter from his granddaughter playing nearby. The farm had given him many crops, but the greatest harvest was the love he had finally learned to nurture. For what you sow, you shall reap, and James, at last, had reaped a heart full of love and peace. Okay, that's the end of the story. Hope that through this story you will have a better life and achieve more results. Thank you. Good night.